Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. It is almost weekend, and I think I can speak for many of us when I say that. Whew, it is just right in time. I know. So you can celebrate it being almost the weekend with this week's Sticky Notes chat. I'm Amanda Stockel. I'm here with Chris Notter. Corey's not with us today, but we are free and sometimes two UX researchers talking about getting stuff done. So as always, if you're listening actually live on LinkedIn, you can ask us questions. We love that. We are happy to kind of follow along as we go and respond to any questions or comments or things you want to share. Or if you've got requests, or if you watch this later, you can always tag any of us on LinkedIn, and you can reach out to us the usual ways. We've got an email address. Oh, I went in the wrong order. Twitterverse, at Sticky Notes Chat, that's us. Then you can email us, chat@stickynotes.chat. And you can check out our website, stickynotes.chat. You're noticing a theme here. Consistency for the win. And also you can use the hashtag Sticky Notes Chat on LinkedIn or any of those places to follow us.
But if you only follow that hashtag, you may not get notified when we go live. Follow each of us if you want to know actually when we go live. Yeah.
Yes, because it turns out this live stream thing is new, and we're working out the bugs.
Well, we're working the best we can within the constraints of what we've been given.
That's right. So with that, let's talk about today's topic. So today's topic is specializing or specialists. So as more places are embracing UX, there's more opportunity to specialize areas. So what kind of specialties are there, and where are we heading? And I know this kind of dovetails into the unicorn question that we've had before, but let's just go ahead and begin with.
This is the anti-unicorn, right? This is what we maybe could be doing rather than trying to be unicorns, right?
Yeah, for sure. So let's just go ahead and start with this. Chris, if you had to say you had a specialty, what would it be?
These days, the thing that I kind of differentiate myself with is ability to do qual research, qualitative rather than, as well as quantitative. I've got a pretty good grounding in stats, and I can do all the quantitative work. The thing where I can really add benefit to teams is with qualitative research, where it's more trying to get to the root of what people are saying or doing through observing them and listening to them talk and asking them questions. Normally smaller sample sizes, but more in-depth work with those individuals, and then giving teams insights from that.
Yeah, very cool.
So I kind of specialized in that. I kind of specialized more in the qual side than the quant side, mainly because I guess I found it was a strength that I had. It wasn't through any specific choice I had. It was just it's just that seems to be something that I'm good at, and that I can add value that way. So it's turned into more of that. Of course, I still do all the sort of design review stuff, lots of stuff around interaction design, but the research side of what I do, this thing that I found I can do pretty well is the qual side of things for sure.
Yeah, well, and let's talk about that, because I think sometimes when people hear specialty in UX, they think, oh, of all of the things in software development, I specialize in UX.
Oh, good,
and
yeah.
Front end. And then there's people who say, okay, within that bucket of UX things, I specialize in research or design. And then you've kind of gone another level in, and you said within research, I specialize more in qualitative research. And so one of the things that I kind of thought would be important to talk about is sort of what levels of granularity specialty means, and what does that look like at different organizations for different people at different parts of their career. Because one thing that I in particular get asked all the time, and I don't know about you, but people are like, how did you start specializing in research? How did you choose that? And I'm like, well, I sucked at the other stuff and I didn't like it. That's not exactly true, but I'm like, well, this is the part I like. So I started doing more of it. And then eventually it became a specialty. But I think that one thing that people get kind of caught up in, like, should I do everything? Should I specialize? How deep should I go? How narrow? How granular? And I always like to remind people that, well, there are certainly trends. You should do whatever you like and are good at. I mean,
Yeah.
within reason, within the scope of UX.
Oh, I'm off. Bye.
See you later. But like within that scope of UX, so and so there's all kinds of different roles, all kinds of different positions, all kinds of different ways that you can present yourself, but it's just kind of important to do that well. So maybe we should talk about some of the different places that we've seen sort of different levels of granularity and specialization.
Yeah, and I mean, just to be clear, you never used to be able to do this. Um,
True.
like, when you were the only UXer in an organization or on a team, there wasn't the opportunity to specialize. You had to do everything that was out there. And it is, like you say, it is only more. You were saying, now you have the opportunity to specialize, and you can say, well, I sucked at everything else, so I started doing this stuff. But in the past, you started to do all the stuff you, well, jokingly sucked at, that you didn't enjoy so much, or that you didn't find that you had such an affinity for. But now there really is this opportunity in a lot of organizations as they grow their UX teams to become a specialist in an area. Um, and so I guess, yeah, let's list some of them. So on the research side, I've seen that people have quite a good opportunity to either specialize in doing quantitative research, even to the point of kind of moving more into the data science side of things,
Yeah.
or coming from data science to be part of a research team that we'd never have had the luxury of having somebody with that background before, who can really just work magic with large tables of information. Um, then there's the qualitative side, and everything from you running more interview-based or research site visit-based work, all the way through to hiring somebody who's got an anthropological or ethnographic background. I guess you also ought to talk about the fact, I know that even some time ago, one of the teams I was working on hired somebody with a library science degree.
Hmm.
And that's what can help you out a lot with doing information architecture, doing a lot of the work around that side of things. Then there's this term, I guess, last 5 years, it's really become more prevalent, the term research ops,
Hmm.
which is and I mean, even back years ago when I was working at Microsoft had a research ops team. They were the people who kind of standardized research procedures across the organization, did the recruiting, which is only a tiny, tiny bit of research ops, but it's very important. It's a way of having economy of scale. Rather than having everybody recruiting their own people, if you have some process where you can get a group of people who can do that for you, it can save you a bunch of money. Governance about what you do and don't do. The one thing that we didn't really have back then, which I think is a large part of research ops, is managing the data corpus. There was like a place where everybody stored all their research, right? But trying to find
Yeah.
stuff in it was still really sucky. There wasn't a really good way of getting to that data. Whereas
Yeah.
now, a lot of research ops teams are charged with pulling information out from and gaining new insights from the data corpus. The data corpus meaning all the stuff that's been done in research before. And I mean, it's so easy just to bury those previous findings. But I remember going back through, say, all the reports I'd done on chat rooms and chat instances, and writing a report on that, which was like a meta report, pulling together all the findings from all those reports. And you learn new stuff. By
Yeah.
having that number of individuals um, in who were participants in different studies, you've just got this whole powerful set of data you can work with. So that's another role for research ops too. I mean, they can do the recruiting, they can do they can actually do publicity, I guess, for the team, for
It like
user research
internal.
around the organization. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I mean, and they can be the people who are responsible for kind of drumming up new business for the user research group around the organization. So yeah, a very powerful role to have if you've got a larger organization that's got multiple teams of user researchers. It can also be that central glue that holds those different teams together. All the user researchers are working, hopefully embedded with their teams to some extent, but then they have this central thing that still gives them an identity of being user researchers and learning from each other and having continual professional education, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to kind of point out too that one trend I've definitely noticed is that I think when a lot of companies were new to UX, they're like, okay, we're going to hire a UX person. right? And and I think that then as as teams matured and as organizations grew, they were like, okay, great, now we're going to hire a few UX people. They still kind of looked at UX as a whole category of people, not as like a bunch of different specialties. And so what I've definitely noticed is that obviously larger organizations just have more money and they've got more roles to fill, but they also tend to be more mature in terms of their team structure, and they have a need for more of that sort of like operational kind of work, like say somebody in research ops or design ops. So I know when a lot of people ask me, they're like, well, everything I'm seeing asks me to be like 100 roles. I'm like, what kind of organizations are you looking at? What kind of roles are you looking at? Because one's not better or worse than the other, but it's much more likely that a huge corporation is going to have more specialty roles than a startup who only has 8 people on their whole staff. So that's something I always like to remind people of. It doesn't mean that it's good or bad necessarily, but if you want one of the more specialized roles, probably I would say that it's a good rule of thumb that the larger the organization, the more specialized the roles might possibly be.
Yeah, either the larger the organization or becoming part of a very specialist organization that works in tandem with other organizations. So some research groups specialize in quant research. Some research groups specialize in core research. And if you're working with one of those kind of consulting or specialist groups, then quite likely you'd be looking to a role that's got more of that focus. But ultimately, if you find yourself wanting to specialize in a role, it's quite likely you're going to end up in a larger organization. You get more opportunities to specialize in those larger organizations.
Or you can be a consultant.
And you can still be a generalist, right? I mean, and the thing is, when you start off your career, it's most likely that you're going to be a generalist because the entry-level roles, you're pretty much going to be doing whatever research is required, and it might end up being a ton of lab-based research studies, or these days the equivalent of that remotely, or it might end up being a ton of, you might be hired into a role where you're doing much more, a ton of interviews or in-person research. Again, more difficult in this day and age, but still possible. So it's possible, especially in a larger organization, that you'd be moving directly into those roles. But if you're new to UX, it's quite likely you'll be doing a broader role anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And one of the things I like to also try to remind people of is that the reason that it takes 10, 12, 15 years to end up being typically in like a very specialist role, or at least a senior specialist role, is because you can't learn to be really good at a really specific thing if you don't understand the basics that come before it, right? So like before you decide whether to specialize in research or design, you kind of have to know the basics of all of it. And then say, within design, if you want to be an interaction designer or a visual designer, those are both totally fine paths. But if you don't have sort of the good foundational knowledge of all of the components of it, then it's going to be much harder to dive in and be really good at one specialty piece. So I kind of try to remind people, it doesn't mean that you're equally as good at all the parts and then add on skill, but it does mean you need at least a foundation, knowing what all the different things are. And then you can layer on expertise after that.
It's so hard to say that to somebody who's wanting to move into one of those roles, because sure, try it, do it. I mean, you might find that you're very successful at it, but seriously, I would echo what you just said there, Amanda. It's important that you understand the breadth of opportunities in the field and understand a little bit about what your colleagues are going to be doing. For instance, before you go specializing in another role, we hired some people who trained directly as ethnographers as their first or second job out of university, and they actually found it quite difficult to understand what user researchers did because they weren't used. They'd been trained in a certain style of doing research, and they couldn't understand how you could just churn through 10 participants in 1 week and get insights enough to get the team moving on something else, and that the insights had to be produced within like 2 days of the end of the study, otherwise the team weren't going to find them useful. And they were used to doing 6-month studies that would
Yeah.
then, they'd then have like a couple of months to synthesize the data and come up with some results that may or may not give insight into a problem. And it was a pretty rude awakening. And to their credit, awesome people really forged a new path for themselves and for, I guess, ethnography by just moving into this role that they kind of made for themselves in the organization, where they just did real, I wouldn't call it discount ethnography, but real quick stuff to help the organization understand deeper issues with some of the tasks and some of the software they were developing. But without that understanding of what user researchers did, they were kind of lost. What you mean? I don't get to do all the stuff I used to. It's just difficult.
Yeah.
So yeah, having that broader understanding really helps people, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. I agree. And also, I know a lot of people ask me like, "Oh, well, like you started in research, right?" I'm like, "Nope, sure didn't." It didn't take me long to have that be the thing I ended up doing most
Right.
of the
Right.
time, mainly because I'm persuasive, and I liked it better. But yeah, I think it's important to have a baseline understanding of kind of all the components of it. So we dove into a bunch of research side of things with specialties. Maybe we should talk about some of the different specialties within the design realm of thing. And both of our researchers, but
Yeah. Well, yeah. But we play
but I think it's
designers on
important.
TV. Yeah.
No, I
No.
don't even play one. I just know
No.
that I'm not.
No.
But I think it's also one of the things that's again kind of important to help people understand is that each of these things can be their own role and they're each
Mhm.
important, but they don't have to be. Like you can do more than one of these specialties in a single role at a company, or you can be fully dedicated to any of these things. And
Mhm.
it doesn't make one more or less valuable than the other. And some of the buckets are bigger than others also, or sometimes things get lumped together
Yeah.
and some things get narrowed out more
Uh, uh,
specifically.
And let's just say, I mean, we're talking about individual roles. It might be that one person is playing several of those roles. This week I'm doing qual research. This week I'm doing quant research. But yes, and in the design side, I mean, you might choose to think of yourself as an interaction designer, but you might have to do visual design work every now and again. You might
Yeah.
have to do weird stuff like designing a set of icons, which can be a very specialist skill. Um, but normally people who design icons are um, working with multiple different teams or multiple different organizations because they've specialized to that degree where to support that level of specialism, they have to have a broad, let's call it client base. It could be clients across different areas of an organization, or it could be clients across different organizations. Same thing with, for instance, typography. It's unusual to see typographers working in an organization. Having said that, when I was at Microsoft, they had a team of typographers who were doing stuff there.
Yeah.
I think places like Adobe probably do the same thing. But typically in organizations, you don't see that kind of, I think Google did too. Uh, Typically in organizations, you don't see that kind of thing unless they're mega organizations.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, yeah, you were listing roles. Carry on.
Oh no, that's okay. So I was just thinking. So we've already talked about a couple of them. So we talked about visual design, we talked about interaction design, content strategy, content design, writing. So UX writing, and those again, they all play together. And it might be that one person is doing any number of those things. It might be that today I am doing content strategy and tomorrow I'm doing copywriting and the following week I'm prototyping something.
Right.
Those are all kind of really valid things. But one of the ways that I like to help people understand it too is I kind of think of on the design side of the spectrum from like most core level to most polish level, or like lowest fidelity to highest fidelity. So
Right.
starting with information and like information architecture and structuring things
Mm-hmm.
and the content and structuring the content, and then layering on more and more to finally getting to like the highest fidelity. I find that helps people kind of grasp what the different parts do.
And again, you're talking about the importance of knowing each of those stages for user research. But I mean, for design, I think it's even more important because if you do get to the state where you're specializing in one of those areas, you will be handing off to somebody else. And if that handoff is over a wall where you don't know what happens on the other side of the wall, that's going to lead to failure. It has to be a handoff where you can actually communicate your ideas to somebody. So yeah, knowing what they're going to be doing with what you produce is so important. So if you're the kind of person who's managed to specialize in lo-fi, like wireframing and stuff like that, I don't know I know anybody who does that directly, but if you were that kind of
Mm.
person, what's going to
Yeah.
happen with what you've created? What's going to happen with that subsequently? Um, if it's going to go to somebody who's going to do more interaction design work or visual design work on it, how are they going to do that? Unless you know what a bit about what their skill set is, you're not going to be able to help them succeed.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I'm curious, in like in your own perspective or in your own experiences, like what have some pros and cons been of um, like specializing or focusing in one area versus doing more things or many things at once?
Um, so here's one which is total honesty. Sometimes it's more interesting to have a mix of stuff to do. Like if I was running lab-based studies every week forever, I just get bored. Um, so I think that having the opportunity to do different work each week is kind of is a draw to being, and in my experience is something which makes keeps me interested in doing what I'm doing. Sometimes I'm doing design reviews where there's actually not much real participant interaction. I'm basing it on what I know about people's behavior generally. Sometimes I'm doing what still call lab-based studies, if even if we're doing them remotely these days, where you've got a set of tasks, you've got a participant who's doing those tasks with a piece of software which may or may not be finished software, and you're kind of measuring the results of what they do to see how well the software is performing. There's other times where I'm doing interviews. There's other times where I'm doing direct observations. Not done much of that recently, but
It's a little harder.
yeah, I mean, I guess it's still possible, but I wouldn't really want to do a follow along with a web camera or something like that. It could be quite interesting. Um, and then there's other times where I'm doing training these days too. Quite a bit of training or talking with people, um, and that breadth really helps me stay engaged with the discipline as a whole. If I was just going to do one of those things, I could do it, but it wouldn't be so much fun for me. And I mean, just
Yeah.
to be clear, you said you didn't start in UX. I wanted to say I started as a systems analyst. So, I mean, that was I did a degree in psychology. I went and worked for a bank, and I started as a systems analyst in their IT department, and then moved into UX from there. So, yeah, it's not like I had a particular thing I was or wasn't going to be doing in UX. I just dropped into it, and at that point, there wasn't a chance to specialize. There was five of us doing it for pretty much the whole of the organization.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but uh, that that kind of gave me that broad grounding in doing different kinds of work at different times for different teams, um, and I still enjoy it. Like I said, I've tended to specialize these days or at least something that I'm recognized for as a specialism is the qualitative research. But um, yeah, if I was just doing qual all the time, I'd be happy enough. But I do like doing the quant stuff every now and again because it's always exciting to see people to be surprised by people working with a piece of software. So yeah, that's what keeps me going is the breadth. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that answer your question? I guess.
Yeah, it does. I again, because so many questions I get when people are like, well, what should I do? Like, should I be a UX generalist or should I be a specialist? And this is, I guess, here it comes, Chris. So you're right.
It
I don't know. It
depends.
depends.
Yeah, I mean,
They-
we talked a lot about individual roles here. We didn't talk about management. Like you can move into a management role for
yeah,
managing teams, right? And that's a different skill set altogether. And being there, done it, didn't really like it that much. I prefer mentoring to managing personally. But uh, but
it's
yeah, I mean that's
different.
a whole different skill set. There's stuff that you need to know as a manager that you don't need to know as an individual contributor. And do you want to do that? Again, what's better? What should you do? It depends. You're not going to move directly into a management role straight out of school, I hope. If you do, that's
Probably
a
not.
mistake for you
If
and
you,
a mistake for the organization.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that's a good point, though, is, and again, to kind of just say, like, you have to really reflect on what is interesting to you, what kind of variety are you interested in. So similar to, I also mostly do qualitative research, but sometimes I do quant, sometimes I do some kind of a little bit of information and architecture type stuff or some content strategy type things. Those aren't really my specialty, but I end up doing them. But also, like, I love the variety of working with new team, working with different sets of people, working on new problems, even if I'm using a lot of the same methods all the time. But some people get really bored by that. So you have to be kind of, A, know yourself, and B, be honest with yourself about what about that is interesting to you
Yeah.
and what will be new and engaging to you over time. And so you can get variety if you want to do the same method or the same thing over and over. That's not totally that's actually probably not totally an option because stuff changes so often that there's just going to be
Oh, well, yeah. I
new
mean, just
problems and new contexts.
yeah, just even running studies, the concept of running studies has changed so much over the last 15 years. And the speed we can turn stuff around with has improved, and the quality of doing remote stuff has improved so much that it's a different thing now than it was 15 years ago. So yeah, if you want to specialize in that, it's not my cup of tea, but I know there's other people who really enjoy running studies all the time. Yay, great, because that means I don't have to. And it's it's great. And just to be clear, I mean, we're talking about this like you have a choice. At this point in time, I
Good
know there's
point.
people who just want a job in
That's
UX. I
fair.
will take any job in UX, just give me a job. And I can see that. I would say you still have a chance to guide your career even within the job that you didn't choose, but it's the job that you ended up in. At least you've got an opportunity there to have some stability and to learn, even if you're forced to be doing a thing you don't necessarily enjoy doing so much. It's a great chance to learn that inside out, become skilled in it, and then start diverging into other stuff and say, hey, well, rather than running a lab-based study this time, why don't we, we're not going to get that much data from doing that. Why don't we do this thing instead? Or, hey, let's consider doing this other technique in the lab, or let's consider getting people in to do things, but not necessarily working with our software, working with some competitor software, or whatever it is. You can broaden your skill set that way, even within a role that you don't think is ideal right now. And having broadened it, then you've got the skill set and you can apply for other jobs that might be more to your liking.
Yeah, that's a super good point. And I know, again, like a lot of the questions that I get around this kind of like specialty thing is from people who are new. I have noticed in the last maybe year and a half to 2 years that a lot more people, like I used to just get random people reaching out to me and say, hey, I'm interested in UX. And now I get people reaching out and saying, hey, I'm interested in UX research.
Right.
So I do think that we have, we are evolving and that it's become, at least the division between research and design seems to be much more commonplace. Even if there's not like further specialties within those things, I think most organizations, or at least like the way a lot of people are talking about this kind of work now, at least that one division seems fairly clear.
Yeah.
Um,
I was just doing, I just was writing and recording a course for LinkedIn on finding a job in UX. And it gave me a reason to really dive into some of the job descriptions that are out there right now.
my
And
bad.
I know, and I mean, to begin with, please, organizations, no more unicorns. We're past that, but um, it also did demonstrate to me that at least the organizations that seem to know what they're doing have really begun to specialize in their requests, in their jobs that they're asking people to do. And they're actually being quite honest. It's like, you will be running research you will be running quantitative research. You will be running qualitative research. We're looking for you to do this kind of thing. And rather than just being, oh, we want someone to do user research, they're really being quite defined in what they want,
Specific.
thank you, that's the word I was looking for, specific. Which is great because it means as somebody who's applying for that job exactly what you'd be doing.
Were those typically larger organizations or not really?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the ones that have the luxury of being able to do that. I think still the smaller organizations, or the let's say younger organizations to some degree, are ones where they probably know that they need this thing called UX or user research. Even they, like you say, they got to that distinction between what's a design role and what's a user research role, but they
Yeah.
don't necessarily know what they need there yet. And if you're their first or their second hire in that space, yeah, um, you know what? It can be a bit scary, but it's also a great opportunity to define that for yourself, what research means. Um, within what the organization needs. You're going to get sacked if you go off and just do what you want to do without actually giving the organization results. But, if you want that generalist role, those are the organizations to go for, because as long as you feel like you can be enough of a self-starter to get it going, because
Yeah.
nobody's going to be helping you out necessarily in those roles, because they don't know. They don't know what they don't know about user research, and you're the person who's going to be that person that helps them understand it.
Yeah, for sure.
But the larger organizations, they're definitely getting to the point where they're saying, we want somebody who's going to be doing this. And especially in larger organizations, it might be that it's a specific division that's hiring. So, for instance, I know that I was looking at some of the Microsoft job roles. They had some for games, for the games user research. Just to be clear, everybody, games user researchers do have fun, but it's not all playing games every day. It's often watching other people playing games, and sometimes those people suck at playing games, and it's really frustrating, especially when your game isn't performing how it should. So, having said that, um, that's a very specific role, user research for games, and it may not sound that different from everything else, but games have a very different interface, and so there's a
It's true.
specific skill set you build up. And if you then went from moving from games to Office, yes, I know people who've done that. It's different, and the teams are expecting different things from you. And the pace of
Yeah.
development can be different too. So yeah, but it's all fun. It's all different stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess to go back to sort of like the original question of that is, if people are looking for jobs and they should be, if they're looking for someplace who is more specialty roles, our vote is look for a larger organization. Chris, what are your thoughts if somebody doesn't really know yet if they like what kind of specialty they should be in, or if they've just taken a boot camp or they're just learning about stuff? Like, what do you think?
Two things you can do. One, informational interviews with people.
Mm-hmm.
Find people in the roles you think you're interested in and ask them what it's really like. I know that a lot of people in the industry will be very happy to give you half an hour of their time if you've got good questions, and if you have a focus for what you're trying to find out. And if you ask them in the email or the LinkedIn in mail or whatever it is, hey, I want to find out these things because I want to do this thing, and I identified you as somebody who's doing that. Please, will you give me half an hour of your time for me to ask you some questions and find out more about what your role's like? So that's one thing you can do. The other one is you can take a generalist role in a larger organization. And even in a large organization, once you're in, sure, you can't just move every 2 weeks, but you've got opportunities to find out about jobs in other departments while you're working there, while you're in a position of security and having an income. And you can go and do the equivalent of an informational interview with folks in other departments just by buying them coffee.
Yeah.
So, it's great. You can go and find out, hey, I really thought I wanted to work in games, but now I've talked with somebody who does games user research. I worked out that really isn't the kind of thing I thought it was, and it isn't what I want to do. Or, you know, I thought I was interested in qual research. I went and found out that, yeah, actually that's the kind of stuff I am interested in, but I don't have the skill set to take me there quite yet. So I'm going to work on a plan with my manager of how to give me some more qual skills over time so I can then go and take one of those roles. But being in a generalist role means you're employed, you're doing user research, you're getting experience, you're working with participants, users all the time, and it gives you that opportunity to start from a position of strength, I guess, of having a job, rather than necessarily thinking, oh, this isn't the optimal job for me, I'll wait until a better one comes up, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Not exactly luxury most people have at this point in time. Oh, this isn't the
No.
optimal job for me. I think
Yeah.
I'll just sit around and do nothing until the optimal job comes up. Not going to happen.
Yeah, I know that doesn't happen very often. I wanted to kind of make a quick point about your thought about like reaching out. While yes, very many people in the UX community are very happy to share their ideas, share time, I want to reiterate Chris's point to be specific. Because I also know lots of people, and myself and Chris and Corey and Creed, who get very general, like, hey, can I pick your brain? Can you tell me what it's like to be a researcher? And that level of general request truthfully, like if I responded to every one of those, I would never do any actual work, because I would spend all day talking to people about what it might be like to do those things.
And
And that's not,
that's why you watch something like this. You find out that stuff from watching something like this. It's the questions you get from watching something like this that you want to ask to those people. And just because we're the
yeah,
public faces doesn't mean we're the best people to ask. There's people in a lot of organizations who don't live stream, but who have better insights than we do necessarily because they're working in that organization. And if it's an organization you care about, why not make a networking contact there?
yeah,
I'm not saying don't
yeah, for
bother
sure.
us, but please, if
That
you
is
do
a
bother
little
us,
how it sounded.
but do it with a specific focus question. It's like when I get people who want to interview me about UX. It's like, okay, send me your list of questions. If you don't have that list of questions, then it's just a fishing expedition for you to think about what your article might be like. No, I'm not that person to help you with that. Send me a list of questions. I'll answer them in email some point, or if they look like really interesting questions I can't answer in email, I'll tell you so and we can talk about them.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well,
same
I
idea.
guess my kind of follow up to that point is not to be grumpy, like don't bother people, but that there's an awful lot of great resources for people who are brand new, who just want, like, if you want to get a sense for what research looks like, watch our courses about UX research on LinkedIn. Listen
Right.
to stuff like these live streams. There's tons of articles. Like UX Mastery is a website that's all centered around like getting started in UX. Start with that stuff and go to people second with your more specific questions. Because if you like, people are not gonna have time to respond to you with that very general stuff.
No,
And
you have to
it's not,
demonstrate you
again,
put some thought in, right?
yeah, it's not to say like don't ever talk to us, but it's just it's impossible to keep up with the number of requests. And there's a lot of great stuff out there that already exists that could answer a lot of that stuff for you. So
Yeah,
um,
yeah. Say
yeah,
say if you're gonna get to the point of wanting to talk with an individual who's got a specific knowledge set, make use of that knowledge set. Don't just ask them general questions. Tell them why they are the person that you need to talk to. What is it about their experiences or what stuff they've written that you can say,
flattery
hey,
is what you're saying. Use flattery.
it helps a bit. I always feel better. I'm not talking about saying, oh, you're so smart. I think I could learn so much from you. Tell me everything you know. That's not going to help. But if you say, hey, I read your article on blah, 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 and I don't think I understand blah, 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 because in my experience, blah, then I'm like, ooh, interesting.
Mhm.
And
Right. So if you needed to reach out to Chris, that's the template.
you've got my blah, blah, blah with something else rather than, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that's exactly it. So yeah, I mean, definitely. So in this course that's not been released yet, it's still going through production. One on finding a career in UX. One of the things I say is build. I don't like this idea of building a personal brand because I think that's kind of a bit cheesy. But definitely building a network, a small but strong network of individuals is good. And one way of doing that is by reaching out to people who are already in the industry and making a good impression on them. You're not going to make a good impression on me if you just say, tell me everything about how you do your job, because that's not useful. But if you ask me a smart question about something I've written, if you ask me a smart question about something that you know I know something about, and you can tell me what you've already done to find out for yourself, I'm more likely to help you out. And it's the same, I
Yeah.
think, with pretty much everybody else. I mean, Amanda, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And that was kind of the point I was getting at. So I think I want to kind of circle back to, we don't have too much more time, but specialties and like if you should specialize or not. Let's just kind of like recap pros and cons of specializing versus staying more general. So I think that for one, it's like, before we say this, is that it just has to be a personal decision. If you are more interested in one thing or another, then go ahead and pursue that, but not at the expense of understanding the foundation of everything else. But so one, it's kind of like you've got to know what works better for you. Some people like variety by doing different kind of tasks. Some people like variety by doing similar kinds of tasks, but in different contexts. So know that about yourself and decide, are you the kind of person who wants to do a little bit of different tasks all the time? If so, a generalist role or kind of, maybe not specializing super deep into something is probably a good idea for you. But I will say that, like, for me anyways, a pro that I see of being a specialist is that I get to dive deeper and learn much more and feel like I'm much better at the kind of one slice of stuff that I chose to focus on than at the wider range of things. Now, that's not to say that people don't exist that like and are good at really wide ranges of things. It's just not that likely. So, and your range, by the way, can be one specialty, it can be 3 specialties, it can be 5, but just also know that, like, the more stuff that you try to put on your belt, the less deep you're going to be able to get into it. And that in some cases that totally makes sense, and that really works for some people, and some people love that. But if you are the kind of person who really wants to dig deep into something and really build expertise, that's really hard to do with a really broad set of things. It's much easier to do with a more narrow scope.
Right. I mean, the longer you've been in the career, the more likely it is you will have had opportunity to lose touch. If you stop doing one kind of research, you can quickly lose touch with the nuances of it and how how that kind of research has changed in the industry too. So yeah, specializing in a couple of things, either a couple of different techniques or one technique across different industries is probably more likely to serve you well than trying to be master of all trades. And we're not even talking about unicorns here who can do the design and the research and everything else, and code as well. So it's even within one of those specialties. For sure, it can be hard to be good at a lot of different areas in those specialties. Even though, I mean, we
For
used to
sure.
have to an extent, right? We were asked to, but in retrospect, were we that good at any of it? I don't know.
Well, just because we were asked to do things doesn't mean that it worked out well. But I think the other thing to kind of bring up there is that there's lots of different ways you can specialize, right? Like, I know people who are qualitative research recruiters in the healthcare space, right? Like, that is a super specific niche. But every time I think of that kind of thing, I'm like, oh, that person pops into my mind. So if there's a really narrow slice of things that you are interested in or experienced in or that you really like, it's okay to be really that specific. But I think the other thing that you need to know is that while you might open a lot of opportunities for yourself, you might also purposely close some doors. And that's okay, but you just need to kind of be cognizant of that. Like, I remember when I first started referring to myself as a researcher and being scared about it, because I was like, well, I don't want to close the door on design. Like, what if I won't get jobs? What if they don't occur to me? And so you just have to be kind of cognizant of if you're going to focus on something, it necessarily means you can't focus on something else, and that's okay. But you have to be prepared for what that means. So again, in my very simple example,
but you also have to know that you have enough clients who will support that kind of work, and the more specialist you get, the broader the number of clients. I'm talking about clients. It could be inside an organization. It could be across organizations if you're in a consulting role like we are. The more specialist you get, the more likely it is that you'll need a broader client set to draw from, because any one of those clients won't need your services as frequently as if you were being a more generalist individual.
Yeah, and that can be totally fine, but it's something you have to know about and you have to be prepared for. And again,
it opens doors, right? If you can say, I am the person who deals with this specific area, then yeah, it could be that more people are actually going to beat a path to your door than if you just say, yeah, I'm a person who does these things. But on the other hand, you need to be able to, it's a benefit of being able to differentiate that. It also probably means that if you find a small enough niche, you can say, I'm the best, or I'm the only person who does this, right?
I am the only one who is standing in this room who does user research. Yeah.
The dog's obviously not in the room at this point with you, I can tell. Yeah.
He's not actually. No, he walked away. And so again, I guess it's just one of those things. It kind of comes back to a lot of the same things that we have, but in UX, especially when it comes to your career, like, what works best depends on you, depends on your specific context, but also you always have an opportunity to shift that. And if at one organization, we didn't actually really talk about this either. This is partially because titles are bad, but a researcher at one organization might look very different than a researcher at another organization. So try to find what works for you and just recognize that like you kind of need to have a good baseline of understanding of everything. But that the deeper you want to go into something, the more expertise you want to build, probably the more narrow your focus needs to be.
Yep.
All right.
Can
I think we'll leave it with that.
That was a great summary. I love it. Yeah. So yeah, from one specialist to another. Thanks for that one. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was great. Well, thanks everyone so much to those of you who joined us live. I'm Amanda, that was Chris. Corey will be back next week. I actually will be running research next week, so I will not be here. But you can, as always, if you've got questions, you can reach out to us all the usual ways.
Shall I put them on the screen?
Yeah, let's do it.
Twitter.
Okay, so Twitter, at Sticky Notes Chat, email chat@stickynotes.chat. We have a website, stickynotes.chat. That is also where you can see past episodes, this will be later. And you can use the hashtag StickyNotesChat on LinkedIn or reach out to Chris or Corey or myself and follow all three of us for notifications when things go live. So we will see you next week, same time, Thursday. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.